We've got a preview of the new D&D classes, but I thought everyone was getting a buff. Why do these ones taste funny? WOTC's unveiling of the new D&D classes is complete, and I have to say that I'm pretty happy with a lot of what they've shown us, but there's some stuff that felt off. Specifically the Paladin, Ranger, and Rogue. Let's just get right into it. The Paladin, like many of the updated classes, had quite a few features remain the same, but they did also have their lay on hands ability changed a bit. So it doesn't affect diseases anymore, but it can be used on constructs and undead, and only requires a bonus action to activate now. They've also been given their spellcasting at first level, granting them access to spells earlier and making it better for multiclassing. Previously, your multiclass spellcasting level would gain 1/2 level rounded down from each level in Paladin. Now that's rounded up instead. Of course, the Paladin will also get access to the new weapon mastery feature along with the other martial classes, except for the monk. This is a pretty big deal, and I made an entire video on it here in case you're interested in more of a deep dive into that new system and some secret tech that WOTC hasn't revealed yet. Just know that this system adds certain properties to weapons that often trigger automatically when they hit, making martial combat a lot more tactical than just swinging your weapon around over and over. Then the dream ends as early as level 2 when we find out that the Paladin Smite feature has been nerfed into the ground. For starters, Divine Smite is now a spell. Ick. Although you do get a free casting of it once per long rest, and they can be used with unarmed strikes now. I kinda want to multiclass a monk with this for funsies. Divine Smites also require a bonus action immediately after hitting a creature with an attack, so they aren't just triggering for free when we land a hit anymore. Smites were definitely overpowered in 5e, but I don't think they deserved this much of a massive nerf. Now they can be counterspelled by enemies, and we're going to be burning a bonus action on this. Of course, this also means that we can only smite once per turn instead of just dumping smites into every attack we land. You will also get to pick up a fighting style at this stage, but that definitely doesn't make up for the massive loss in power from the old version of smites. Even though paladins and every other class now have access to the entire list of fighting styles, including an improved version of the protector option that kinda sucked before. At level 3, however, we do get a big buff with 2 channel divinity uses per short rest instead of just 1, with that increasing to 3 uses at level 11. Our formerly separate divine sense is now wrapped up into channel divinity, but it lasts 10 minutes instead of just a moment like the old version did, making it a little more than just a flavor ability now. As per usual, you'll also get your Oath subclass at this point, choosing between Oath of Devotion, Glory, Ancients, and Vengeance. From what we've seen, these subclasses are mostly the same, with some slight quality of life improvements and even a couple of downgrades. Devotion Paladins are now able to imbue their weapon with sacred energy as part of an attack action with that weapon, instead of it taking a full action like before. So more people are likely to add their charisma modifier to their attack rolls now. And later, apparently they can give half cover to allies within a certain range when you smite, and create a radiant aura of burning light around you as a bonus action instead of an action for a full minute. The Oath of Glory will still allow you to become a peerless athlete and give yourself advantage on athletics and acrobatics checks as a bonus action, but now this lasts for 1 hour instead of 10 minutes. You'll also be able to grant 10 feet of extra movement speed to your allies within 10 feet of you, instead of just those within 5 feet. And you'll get access to the new Yolan's Regal Presence spell that can force others to bow to you and take psychic damage. The Oath of the Ancients gets an improved channel divinity that allows you to ensnare enemies en route since the old version was terrible, but their aura of warding now only grants your allies within 10 feet resistance to psychic, radiant, and necrotic damage instead of all spell damage in general, like before. And the Vengeance Paladin can activate their beloved Vow of Enmity as part of an attack action instead of a bonus action, so that we have advantage on attack rolls against a creature for a minute. This might seem like a buff, but remember, we're already using our bonus action for smites now, so this is neutral at best, in my opinion. Though, since we don't have all of the information in front of us, I'll have to wait until later to cover these in more depth in my full class guides. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss those. And again, I don't think they're going to make up for the fall from grace that we experienced earlier. At level 4, Paladins and every other class will get access to their usual ability score improvements or a feat, and again at 8th, 12th, and 16th levels, but there are a couple of minor differences here. First, ability score improvements are themselves feats now, though this makes no real mechanical difference, and every class will get access to something even better at 19th level instead of an extra ASI or other feat. But we'll get to that in a bit. For now, level 5 grants us our usual extra attack feature alongside a new Faithful Steed ability that sees us always have the Find Steed spell prepared and ready to be cast once per long rest for free. The spell itself is Paladin exclusive and has also been given the ability to be upcast for additional benefits with its own stat block now, although our free casting will always be at the spell's base level. That said, the Steed stat block does have tons of goodies like a 60-foot flying speed if you upcast it at 4th level, and bonus actions like a 60-foot teleport, a 60-foot frighten effect, or a decent healing effect depending on the type of steed you summon. I do have to admit that this is pretty sweet if the playtest version is what we see in the printed class. Then we'll still get our aura of protection at level 6. That much is mostly unchanged and I'm glad for it. Level 9 will grant us a new Abjure Foes ability that uses Channel Divinity to cause charisma modifier number of creatures to become frightened of you against a wisdom saving throw. And creatures frightened in this way are limited to taking an action, bonus action, or movement on their turn. It kind of feels like the Conquest Paladin did make an appearance after all, and I do really like this debuff ability being baked into the base Paladin class. We'll get improved Divine Smites at 11th level to remind us of what we lost, and level 14 will give us Restoring Touch, which is more or less the same as the old Cleansing Touch feature. It now only removes certain conditions instead of absolving willing creatures of spell effects in general. But I'd say this is more of a lateral move since it can now work on conditions from monster abilities as well. Level 18 still increases the range of our auras to 30 feet, and then at level 19, every class will have a chance to take an epic boon instead of a regular feat. These epic boons are extremely powerful too, so even though you can still take an ASI or another feat, you probably won't want to. Look, I get everyone being so upset about smites being spells, and taking your bonus action from you as well. But I kind of feel like the changes to Paladin overall are a slight net positive, being that it was one of the most ridiculous classes in 2014 and used in all sorts of broken builds. I think the changes we got were pretty warranted. The updates to the Paladin feel like it shifts its identity a bit as well. It feels like a protector and a debuff specialist built on top of a holy warrior chassis, so I'm not upset at all, which is more than I can say about the Ranger. The community has taken even more of a grievance with the new Ranger, if we can even call it new. WOTC certainly kept referring to it as such, but I'm not so sure. At level 1, just like the Paladin, we will be getting earlier access to our spellcasting, so that at least is good. We'll also be able to use a Druid focus for our spells instead of always having to juggle with spell components between making attacks. Additionally, Rangers prepare their spells each day now instead of being stuck with your selections until you level. However, you can only swap out one spell per long rest, so I wouldn't expect a ton of extra versatility here, just a little extra. Rangers, of course, will also get access to weapon mastery, just like the Paladin, and the natural explorer feature that we used to get is gone for good now. Although the designers argue that the gaps it leaves behind are filled in by the availability of utility spells like Speak with Animals and Goodberry. I can see where they're coming from, but the Ranger needed a buff to catch up with the other classes, let alone keep up, and this is not a buff. The real source of contention here begins with the favored enemy feature that now sees us with the Hunter's Mark spell always prepared and the ability to cast it proficiency bonus times per long rest for free. The spell itself is definitely a good one, offering us 1d6 extra damage anytime we hit a creature with an attack, and 2 free castings of it this early on is going to be very impactful for us. However, veteran players will also know that this spell often cripples the Ranger's spellcasting by requiring concentration when so many of the Ranger's other great spells also require concentration. This is better than the solution posed by Tasha's Cauldron of Everything that gave us a class feature that was actually weaker than the spell and required concentration, but I'm frankly surprised that WOTC is still so stuck on this. Then at level 2, we'll gain expertise in a skill of our choice that we're proficient in, and 2 languages as well from the Deft Explorer feature, which is almost a copy and paste from Tasha's Cauldron. It's pretty likely that most rangers will go with survival, stealth, or perception here, and I'm pretty happy to have such a high bonus to an important ability this early on. However, this is really just keeping us on par with the previous ranger with Tasha's optional class features. Is this really a redesign, or is it just a reprint at this point? We'll also get a fighting style here just like the Paladin, so there's not much else to note except that the Druidic Warrior option from Tasha's has been added, though I can't currently see it being of much use compared to the other options. If you want extra cantrips to focus on your spellcasting, you should probably be playing a Druid instead, or at least multiclassing. Then we'll get access to our Ranger subclass at level 3, choosing from Beastmaster, Fey Wanderer, Gloom Stalker, and Hunter. Admittedly, several of these options did receive a large degree of reworking, but not all of them for the best. The Beastmaster stat blocks now scale with you like they did in Tasha's, and the beast you fight alongside can even benefit from your Hunter's Mark at least once per turn, resulting in a considerable increase in damage, even if we're still being forced to use Hunter's Mark. Fey Wanderer didn't change much and still grants you teleports galore with Misty Step and extra castings of the Summon Fey spell. You'll also get some extra psychic damage on your attacks, and you'll get features that guard you against being charmed or frightened, just like before. The Gloom Stalker, as you might have guessed, however, is not the same. You'll still be considered invisible for creatures that need dark vision to see you, and you'll still get dark vision or a boost to it if you already have it, though you'll now be considered good at initiative and get some extra damage that you can apply on more than just the first round of combat, a limited number of times per day. The rest of the subclass is quite different as well, giving you abilities to exude an aura of fear and teleport out of harm's way when targeted with an attack, at least according to the playtest. And perhaps the most altered out of these subclasses is the Hunter, who now gets to know the resistances, immunities, and vulnerabilities of Hunter's marked creatures, and even change out their multiple choice class features instead of being locked into them like they were before. There's some other new bits here too, like reaction resistance to a damage type that lasts until the end of the current turn, and a way to do a little extra damage to another enemy with your Hunter's Mark. I know I wasn't a huge fan of this subclass in the past, but it does actually feel like it's getting the Ranger to where it needs to be now, even if we're still once again relying way too heavily on a first level spell in Hunter's Mark. From there, we'll get the same feat levels at 4th, 8th, 12th, and 16th, as well as an epic boon at 19th level and an extra attack at 5th level. Level 6 will give us a sizable 10 feet of extra movement speed, as well as a climbing and swimming speed equal to your walking speed, but you won't be able to benefit from that if you want to wear heavy armor. Granted, Rangers don't have heavy armor proficiency to begin with, but I feel like this added caveat wasn't really necessary, and it wasn't there in the old version from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. We'll get 2 more expertise skills at level 9, so we can have great bonuses to survival, stealth, and perception for living out that Ranger flavor fantasy, but it does feel like level 9 could be a little late for some campaigns to experience that. At level 10, in another adaptation of the optional rules from 5e, the new Ranger can use an action to grant themselves temporary HP, and you'll get to remove a level of exhaustion when you complete a short rest instead of the typical long rest requirement. This will probably be pretty impactful in my own games due to some of the homebrew rules that I run to make the game a little more challenging, but I'm not sure how often I'll see it used at other tables. There really isn't much changed here aside from its number of uses being tied to your wisdom modifier instead of your proficiency bonus. So again, is this really a redesign, WOTC? 13th level gives us the first truly new feature for Ranger, as taking damage can no longer break our concentration on Hunter's Mark. But this doesn't change the fact that we are still concentrating on Hunter's Mark. We weren't worried about losing concentration. We're worried about what concentration is preventing us from doing, accessing most of the spellcasting feature of this class. And even that aside, this feels like it comes online pretty late with no added boost to the damage output of Hunter's Mark itself. We're presumably still just getting an extra 1d6 damage on our attacks this late in the game. Then we're back to our old tricks at level 14. Once again, we have an ability that's pulled straight from the optional rules for Ranger in 5e, and we're calling it new. This one will allow us to become invisible as a bonus action until the end of our next turn, granting advantage to any attack rolls we make during that time. This feature may not be new, but it is quite strong since taking actions and attacks by extension doesn't end our invisibility, and the old version actually only lasted until the start of your next turn, so we can benefit from advantaged attacks on 2 subsequent turns. Moreover, we'll be able to do this wisdom modifier times per long rest instead of it being tied to our proficiency bonus. But that brings up an interesting thought here. Earlier, our wisdom modifier was likely to be just a bit better than our proficiency bonus, but now I'm not so sure. As we get into the late game, our proficiency bonus is likely to be higher than our wisdom modifier, and that makes this a slight nerf, not a buff to the old ranger. We'll become a precise hunter at level 17 for advantage on attacks against creatures marked by Hunter's Mark, and by this point, you'd have 6 free castings of the spell as well. This always on advantage is nice, but it creates an awkward overlap with our 14th level ability that we just mentioned, and I wonder how often it'll actually come into play. Even then, the feature is on par at best compared to what most other classes get this late in the game, so I'm not at all thrilled about what we're seeing here. Instead of a brand new class or a redesign, it feels like we got a random assortment of abilities from older material and a couple of new features sprinkled in with little to no thought about how they synergize together. To further that conclusion, our level 18 ability is basically just a clarification and an improvement of a former feature that now gives us 30 feet of blind sight. The overall idea seems to be that we can utilize effects like magical darkness, Hunter's Mark, and our invisibility to always have advantage and attack from unseen vantages, but the reality seems a bit more clunky. These abilities don't work together to form anything greater than the sum of their parts. Instead, they offer different overlapping ways to do the same thing. If Hunter's Mark is so important and we have so many free uses, why do we need blind sight except for niche scenarios with magical darkness? Why do we want invisibility except to hide ourselves from the enemy and redirect whatever attacks would be headed our way to one of our allies instead? And then we'll get the real letdown at 20th level with our capstone Foe Slayer. With this ability unlocked, our Hunter's Mark will deal 1d10 force damage on each hit instead of 1d6. This is a noteworthy improvement, yes, but it's one that I would have liked to have seen a lot earlier considering that we're so shackled to using Hunter's Mark for about half of our abilities to even function up to this point. Even with this boost, the Ranger's damage output falls short of where it should be, regardless of the always advantage that it has. I'm obviously pretty surprised by this apparent lack of attention that the Ranger has been given, but there are some silver linings here. It's not all bad. First, the Ranger is certainly better than the 2014 printing and even a bit better than the Tasha's Cauldron version. Second, the spell list for Rangers has supposedly seen some reworking, so hopefully that means we'll have much less of a reliance on concentration spells. Third, the playtest did feature a new version of Hunter's Mark with upcasting that markedly increased its damage output, so depending on if that made it through, it could make the design choices here a whole lot more reasonable. Finally, the Ranger subclasses actually seem like they'll be adding quite a bit of damage output and utility on top of both Hunter's Mark and the base class, so that could help to balance things out a little too. Regardless, it should be said that the Ranger is a likely contender for the worst class in D&D again, but it's not alone at the bottom. Even I have been pretty happy with the Rogues updates coming into the 2024 PHB, but there are some implications that make this new version a little worse than you might first think. To start, just like the Paladin and Ranger, we will get weapon mastery with 2 weapons of our choice that we can change out after a long rest, and this will already increase the Rogue's abilities in combat. The Vex and Nick properties in particular work really well for the Rogue's sneak attack, which we will still get at level 1 along with expertise in 2 skills or Thieves tools and Thieves Can't, which now grants an extra language proficiency. Things continue going well at level 2 with our typical cunning action that allows us to dash, disengage, or hide as a bonus action. And then at level 3, we'll see the steady aim optional feature from Tasha's has made it into the Rogue's base class, which will afford us advantage when we take a bonus action to steady ourselves and set our speed to 0, so long as we haven't moved yet on our turn. This feature is an awesome addition and has been a great part of many games at many tables since its introduction a few years ago. So I'm happy to see it added here officially. We'll also get to pick out a subclass here in the Arcane Trickster, Assassin, Soulknife, and Thief. The Arcane Trickster we all know and love is mostly unchanged with a few improvements like the removal of spell school restrictions for your spell selection, the ability to use an arcane focus, and a boost to your mage hand ability so that it can be used to trip enemies in between stealing all their stuff. I actually covered the Assassin at length in another video since we did get the full rules for that subclass earlier if you'd like to check that out. The Soulknife got some improvements to their psychic blades that allows them to utilize their weapons for opportunity attacks and use the Vex weapon mastery property with them in general. The Thief got the most noteworthy improvements that allow you to attune to more magic items and activate them as a bonus action, gain a climb speed and use your dexterity for jump distance, and even make attacks while hidden and stay hidden. 4th level gives us the same feat options as everyone else, and you might be wondering, where's the problem? Don't worry, I'm getting there. At level 5, we'll get access to our first completely new feature for Rogue outside of weapon mastery, and it's one that I really like. Cunning Strike inflicts certain debilitating effects when we hit with our sneak attack, and so in exchange for 1d6 of our sneak attack damage dice, we can poison our target for 1 minute against a Constitution saving throw that they can repeat at the end of each of their turns, trip an opponent into the prone condition against a dexterity saving throw, or immediately withdraw and move up to half our movement speed without provoking opportunity attacks. The saving throw DC for the first 2 effects will end up being 8 plus our dexterity modifier and our proficiency bonus, but this is where things get a little iffy. With the previous version of the Rogue, many in the community would often point out that their damage output was fairly lacking compared to other classes, even other martials. With most other classes seeing some pretty significant damage increases, the Rogue is actually losing damage here for the possibility of their target failing the save. I think any doubt could have been expelled if the Rogue's sneak attack damage would have been increased slightly to account for this new feature, but they didn't do that, and this causes the problem to compound a little bit later. First, it's important to note that we'll still get expertise in 2 more skills at level 6, and we'll get the wildly powerful reliable talent feature at level 7 now, instead of at level 11. This is what allows the Rogue to treat any 9 or lower on a d20 roll for a tool or skill that we have proficiency with as a 10 instead. This was a pretty wild ability before, and now it's available even earlier. It's certainly a bright spot for the new Rogue base class and almost makes up for the issues I mentioned a moment ago. And keep in mind that we will still have the good old evasion feature here too, so we can still dodge fireballs and other dexterity saving throws like nobody's business, taking no damage on a success and half damage on a failure. This level will be huge for the new Rogue, and it should be since we won't see another base class feature until we get to level 11, where we get improved Cunning Strike. At this point, we'll be able to use 2 of our Cunning Strike options every time we land a sneak attack instead of just 1. I'd imagine that most of the time we'll be trying to poison them and withdraw, or poison them and trip them prone, but now we're sacrificing 2d6 damage on every sneak attack. This ironically sort of reminds me of how the old monk used to have to spend their key points to do the same stuff that the Rogue could do for free. The concept is cool and the implementation is easy enough to understand, but again, I just think we could have seen a damage boost to compensate, or see this feature as a standalone feature that doesn't require us sacrificing our damage output. Then at 14th level, we get more options to use with our Cunning Strikes that cost even more of our damage. Daze costs 2d6 and forces the target to take only a move, action, or bonus action on their following turn against a Constitution saving throw. Obscure costs 3d6 and blinds a target until the end of their next turn against a dexterity saving throw, and Knockout costs 6d6 to render a target unconscious for a minute against a Constitution saving throw. These are some powerful effects, especially the Knockout option, but at this point, we'd be trading pretty much all of our damage for this when other classes have access to spells and abilities that do more damage with similar added effects. Level 15 gives us a slight boost from the old version of Rogue for proficiency in Wisdom and Charisma saving throws instead of just Wisdom, and level 18 will give us the same great elusive feature that says attacks can't have advantage against you unless you're incapacitated. And then our capstone at level 20 allows us to turn any fail on a d20 roll into a 20, once per short rest. This is a lot better than the old version of the capstone, but the relative strength of the rogue at this point pales in comparison to many of the other classes. The rogue's position in the D&D lineup has always been that of the skill specialist, and I think it does a great job of that here, so I'm not sure we're looking at something as troubling as what the ranger might be. And it does seem like the 2024 PHB will give us a more balanced version of the game, but I do feel like we're staring at another decade of certain classes and features that don't live up to the hype of what this new edition is supposed to be. At the end of the day, someone has to take the mantle of worst class in D&D. So who do you think that is? Let me know down in the comments, and make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one that covers the all-new subclasses WOTC has revealed thus far. Now, until next time, go out there and make some chaos.